The kerosene lamp flickered against the rough-hewn walls of the cabin, casting long shadows across Thomas Whitlow's fevered face. Sarah pressed the damp cloth to his forehead, her fingers trembling not from the December cold that seeped through every crack in the logs, but from the knowledge that settled like lead in her stomach. Her husband was dying. "Sarah," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind outside. His hand, once so strong from years of wielding axes and saws, now felt fragile as bird bones in her grasp. "I'm here," she murmured, leaning closer. The scent of pine sap and fever sweat mingled in the cramped space. "Save your strength." But they both knew strength was a luxury neither could afford. The accident at the logging camp 3 days ago had crushed more than Thomas's ribs. It had crushed their future. The company doctor, a whiskey-breathed man who'd barely glanced at the wounds, had shaken his head and left them with nothing but a bottle of laudanum and empty condolences. Sarah adjusted the threadbare quilt around her husband's shoulders, remembering how her mother had sewn it as a wedding gift just 2 years ago. 2 years. It felt like a lifetime, and yet no time at all. They'd come west with such hope, leaving behind the crowded tenements of St. Louis for the promise of their own land, their own life. The storm that had been building all day finally unleashed its fury. Snow pelted the small window like handful after handful of salt, and the wind found every gap in their hastily built shelter. Sarah fed another precious log to the stove, watching their wood pile dwindle. She'd need to cut more tomorrow, though the thought of wielding Thomas's heavy axe made her arms ache in anticipation. "The deed!" Thomas gasped suddenly, his eyes wide with panic. "In the tin box, under the floorboard." "Hush now," Sarah soothed, though ice formed in her veins. She knew what he was trying to tell her. The land deed, their only proof of ownership for these 40 acres of mountainside. Without Thomas's name on it, without his presence to defend their claim, she'd have no legal standing. A widow's word meant nothing out here where might made right, and paper meant less than the gun used to defend it. The night dragged on in a haze of labored breathing and whispered prayers. Sarah held Thomas's hand as his chest rose and fell in increasingly irregular rhythms. She talked to him about their plans, the garden she'd plant come spring, the children they'd raise, the house they'd build to replace this crude cabin. Lies, all of them now, but she spoke them like incantations against the inevitable. When the wind finally quieted in the pre-dawn hours, so did Thomas. Sarah sat in the sudden stillness, still holding his cooling hand, unable to move, unable to accept. The lamp had burned low, casting barely enough light to see his face, peaceful now in a way it hadn't been since the accident. She should prepare his body, should wash him, dress him in his Sunday clothes, the ones carefully wrapped in paper at the bottom of their trunk. But the ground outside was frozen solid beneath 3 feet of snow. Even if she could dig through it, the earth below would be like iron. Thomas would have to wait for spring thaw for a proper burial, and the thought of it, of him lying here in their home for months, threatened to break something inside her. A wolf howled somewhere in the valley below, the sound carrying clear and mournful through the still air. Sarah finally released Thomas's hand and stood on legs that had gone numb from sitting. She covered his face with the quilt, then moved mechanically to bank the fire. Survival didn't pause for grief. The next days blurred together. Sarah wrapped Thomas's body in canvas and rope, moving it to the lean-to shed where the cold would preserve him. She rationed her food: salt pork, cornmeal, dried beans, and precious little else. The coffee ran out first, then the sugar. She melted snow for water and learned to ignore the constant gnaw of hunger. On the 5th day, she heard horses. Sarah grabbed Thomas's rifle from above the door, checking the load. 3 shots left, and no more ammunition. She peered through the frost-covered window as 2 riders approached, their horses struggling through the deep drifts. She recognized Jacob Morrison before he even dismounted, the land agent who'd sold them this parcel, always dressed too fine for the frontier, with soft hands and harder eyes. The man with him she didn't know, but his presence boded ill. "Mrs.?" Whitlow, Morrison called out, tipping his hat with a mock courtesy. I heard about your husband's unfortunate accident. Sarah cracked the door open but didn't lower the rifle. State your business. Mr. Morrison. Now. No need for hostility. I've come to discuss your situation. Might we come in? It's mighty cold out here. We can talk fine through the door. Morrison's companion spat tobacco juice into the snow, staining it brown, up close. She could see he wore a deputy's badge, though she'd lay odds it was bought rather than earned. I'll be direct then, Morrison said, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Your husband owed 3 months' payment on this land. With him gone, that debt falls to you, unless you can pay. He paused, pretending to calculate. $90 by week's end. I'm afraid we'll have to reclaim the property. That's a lie, Sarah said, though her voice shook. We paid through the winter. Thomas has the receipts. Do you? I'd be happy to examine them. Morrison's smile was thin as paper. They both knew Thomas kept the receipts in his wallet, and his wallet had been lost in the accident, or so the camp foreman had claimed. You can't turn me out in the dead of winter. The law's the law, ma'am. Though perhaps we could come to an arrangement. His eyes traveled over what he could see of her through the cracked door, and Sarah's skin crawled. A young woman like yourself. All alone up here. It ain't proper. Ain't safe neither. Sarah's finger found the trigger. Get off my land. The deputy's hand moved to his sidearm, but Morrison waved him off. No need for unpleasantness. We'll return in 3 days. Mrs. Whitlow, I suggest you use that time to either find the money or pack your belongings. Good day. She watched them ride away until they disappeared into the tree line, then sank to the floor, the rifle clattering beside her. $90 might as well have been $900. They had maybe $10 hidden in the coffee tin, saved coin by coin for spring supplies. Sarah allowed herself 5 minutes to cry, hot, angry tears that solved nothing, then pushed herself up. She'd need firewood. She'd need water. She'd need a miracle. But those seemed in short supply in the Montana territory. She spent the next day taking inventory. 2 blankets, 1 change of clothes, Thomas's tools, axe, saw, hammer, her few precious books, though she'd likely have to burn them for warmth soon enough. The wedding photograph, already fading. Her mother's silver hair combs, the only things of value she owned, and wouldn't fetch near $90 even if she could get to town to sell them. The second night alone. The wolves came closer. Sarah could see their eyes reflecting green in the darkness beyond the window. She kept the fire burning high, wasting wood she couldn't spare, and tried not to think about how they could smell death even through the cold. On the morning of the 3rd day, she made her choice. She couldn't fight Morrison and whatever claim he'd manufactured. She couldn't survive here alone through the winter, but she'd be damned if she'd let them find her here, waiting like a lamb for slaughter. Sarah packed what she could carry, dried food wrapped in oilcloth, the blankets rolled tight. Thomas's revolver with its 3 remaining bullets tucked into her coat. She dressed in layers. Her dress, Thomas's pants underneath for warmth, his heavy coat over her own thin one. She must have looked like a ragamuffin, but vanity was another luxury she couldn't afford. She stood at Thomas's makeshift grave in the lean-to, trying to find words for goodbye. I'm sorry, was all she managed. I'm so sorry. Then she wrapped her shawl tight around her head and shoulders, shouldered her meager pack, and stepped out into the white wilderness. The storm that had been building since dawn was already dropping thick flakes. Good. It would cover her tracks. Sarah had no destination in mind, only away. Away from Morrison's grasping hands, away from the cabin that smelled of death and broken dreams. The nearest town was Cedar Falls, 15 miles through the mountains, but she couldn't risk it. Morrison would expect her to go there. Instead, she turned north, following a deer trail into the deeper woods. The snow came harder now, wind driving it sideways, stinging her exposed face. She pulled the shawl tighter and pushed on. By midday, she'd lost all sense of direction. The world had become a swirling white void. Her feet had gone numb despite the 2 pairs of wool socks. Ice crystals formed on her eyelashes, and she had to keep brushing them away to see. Sarah stumbled over a hidden root and fell hard, the pack driving the breath from her lungs. She lay there in the snow, gasping, and for a moment considered simply not getting up. It would be easy, peaceful even. Just close her eyes and let the cold take her to wherever Thomas had gone. But something stubborn in her core, the same thing that had brought her west in the first place, forced her to her hands and knees. She'd die on her feet if she died at all. She struggled upright, but the fall had disoriented her completely. Every direction looked the same, white on white on white. The deer trail had vanished. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. Panic killed faster than cold out here. "Move," she told herself. "Just move." But her legs wouldn't cooperate. The numbness had spread up past her knees. She took one step, then another, each one harder than the last. The pack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She thought about dropping it, but knew that would be signing her death warrant. The wind howled like all the demons of hell were riding it. Sarah couldn't feel her face anymore. Her thoughts came slow and thick as molasses. She was supposed to be doing something. Walking. Yes, walking. But why? She fell again, and this time getting up seemed impossible. The snow was soft here, almost warm, like a feather bed. Her mother used to have a feather bed, back in Ohio. Smelled like lavender. Or was that her grandmother? Hard to remember. "My strength is gone," she whispered to the storm, though the wind tore the words away before they could form. Tears froze on her cheeks as soon as they fell. "Thomas, my strength is gone." The world grew darker. Though whether from the storm or her failing vision, she couldn't tell. Sarah tried to crawl, but her hands wouldn't work right. Everything was white and cold and fading. Then, through the howling wind, came a sound that didn't belong. Hoofbeats, steady and sure despite the storm. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice was gone, spent like everything else. A shape materialized from the white, tall and dark against the snow. A horse, and on it, a figure that seemed carved from the storm itself. Broad shoulders and a long duster coat, a hat pulled low against the wind. Sarah tried to focus, but her eyes wouldn't cooperate. The figure dismounted, moving toward her with purpose. Strong arms lifted her from the snow as if she weighed nothing. "Easy now?" A deep voice rumbled, barely audible above the wind. "I've got you." The last thing Sarah remembered was being lifted onto the horse, wrapped in something warm that smelled of leather and wood smoke. Then darkness claimed her, and she knew no more. Sarah woke to warmth and the scent of pine burning. For a moment, she thought she was back in her cabin, that Thomas would be there when she opened her eyes, that the past week had been nothing but a fever dream. But the ceiling above her was different, higher, with exposed beams blackened by years of smoke, and the bed beneath her was softer than their straw mattress had ever been. She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Every muscle ached, and her head spun with the effort. A figure moved in the shadows beyond the firelight, and fear shot through her exhausted frame. "You're safe." The voice was the same deep rumble she remembered from the storm. A man stepped into the light, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that hadn't seen a razor in days. His eyes were gray as winter sky, watchful but not unkind. "Where?" Sarah's voice came out as a croak. Her throat felt raw, as if she'd been screaming. "My place, about 8 miles north of Settler's Ridge." He moved to a pot hanging over the fire, ladling something into a bowl. "You've been out 3 days. Fever broke yesterday." 3 days. Sarah processed this slowly. My things. By the door. What there was of them. He approached with the bowl, and she caught a better look at him. Maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with men who lived rough. His hands were scarred but gentle as he helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her. "I need to go," Sarah said, though the effort of sitting had left her dizzy. "I can't." "You can't do anything until you get your strength back. Eat." The bowl held a thin broth that tasted of venison and wild herbs. Sarah's stomach cramped at the first sip, but she forced herself to take another. The man, her rescuer, watched her with those storm-gray eyes, saying nothing. "Thank you," she managed between sips. "I'm Sarah Whitlow." "Caleb Thorne." He turned back to the fire, giving her privacy to eat. "When you're done, there's more, and water." Sarah studied him as she ate. His movements were economical, practiced. Everything in the cabin spoke of long solitude. One chair, one set of dishes visible on the shelf, hooks by the door with only one coat. Yet the space was clean, organized. Not what she'd expect from a bachelor's dwelling. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Wasn't looking to find anyone. Was checking my trap lines before the worst of the storm hit. Your tracks crossed the creek about a mile south. Fresh enough I knew whoever made them was still out there." He shrugged. "Would have been a crime to leave you." Most men wouldn't have bothered. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to read. "I'm not most men." When she finished the broth, he brought her water and a piece of hard biscuit. "Soak it first. Your stomach's not ready for much else." Sarah did as instructed, using the time to take better stock of her situation. The cabin was larger than theirs had been. Hers. She corrected herself. Not theirs anymore. One main room with a loft above. A lean-to visible through a door that probably held supplies. Everything built solid. Made to last. Made by someone who planned to stay. Mr. Thorne. Caleb. The name felt strange on her tongue. "I'm grateful. Truly. But I should explain." She stopped. Explain what? That she was a widow fleeing debts she couldn't pay. That she had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. That Morrison was probably already looking for her. No need. He pulled the single chair closer to the bed but kept a respectful distance. "Whatever sent you into that storm is your business. But if someone's likely to come looking, I should know." Sarah weighed her options. Trust came hard out here, especially to a woman alone. But this man had saved her life, tended her through fever. She owed him some truth. "My husband died 10 days ago. Logging accident. The land agent says we owe back payments, but it's a lie. He wants—" She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. "I can guess what he wants." Caleb's voice had gone flat. "Morrison? You know him?" "Know of him. He's run that game before. Finds widows, claims debts, offers to let them work it off." His jaw tightened. "Those who refuse end up missing or married to one of his associates." Sarah shivered despite the warmth. "I couldn't pay, couldn't stay, so I ran." Into a blizzard. Seemed the better option at the time. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "Can't argue that logic." He stood, moving to add wood to the fire. "You can stay until you're healed. Storm's not done yet anyway. After that," he trailed off. "After that, I'll move on. I won't bring trouble to your door." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Trouble finds its own way. Always has. The next days passed in a quiet routine. Sarah slept, ate what she could, and slowly felt strength returning to her limbs. Caleb came and went, checking traps, hunting, maintaining the endless chores that winter demanded. He spoke little, but his presence was steady, undemanding. On the 4th day, she insisted on getting up. Her legs shook like a newborn colt's, but she made it to the chair by the fire. Caleb watched from the doorway, ready to catch her if she fell, but didn't interfere. "I should be helping," she said. "Earning my keep. You're healing. That's enough." But Sarah had never been one to sit idle. The next morning, she was up before him, the coffee already brewing. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, just accepted the cup she offered. She found ways to be useful. Mending, there was always mending with a man living alone. Cooking, though supplies were limited. Caleb had salt pork and venison, dried beans, cornmeal, and precious little else. But Sarah had learned to make much from little. They developed a rhythm without discussing it. She'd wake to find wood already stacked by the stove, water buckets filled. He'd return from his rounds to find a hot meal waiting, his torn shirt repaired. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers who hadn't learned the steps yet. In the evenings, with the wind howling outside, the silence grew heavier. Sarah found herself stealing glances at him as he cleaned his rifle or repaired a trap. There was a sadness in him, buried deep. She recognized it, the same weight she carried. "You've lived here long?" she asked one night, needing to fill the quiet. 6 years. Alone? His hand stilled on the trap. "Yes." She waited, but he offered nothing more. Sarah understood. Some stories were too heavy to share with strangers, even ones who'd saved your life. But as the days passed, small pieces emerged. A comment about the cavalry when he adjusted his saddle with practiced ease. A reference to New Mexico when she mentioned missing green chili. The way he sometimes stared south with an expression that spoke of ghosts. "I should tell you," he said suddenly one evening, apropos of nothing. "In case it matters, I was tried for murder 8 years ago, in Socorro." Sarah's hands didn't pause in their knitting. Wool she'd found in a basket. Probably meant for socks he'd never gotten around to making. "Were you guilty?" "Jury said I was." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw surprise in those gray eyes. "No, but the man who had money, I had a reputation." 4. Being good with a gun. Too good, maybe. He turned back to the fire. "Spent 2 years in prison before the real killer got drunk and confessed on his deathbed. By then, the damage was done. The woman He stopped. "Doesn't matter now." But it did matter. Sarah could see it in the way he held himself, careful and contained. This man who'd pulled her from death, who'd tended her with such gentle hands, carried wounds that had never healed. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Don't be. I've made my peace with it." He stood abruptly. "Need to check the horses." Sarah watched him go, pulling on his heavy coat and disappearing into the swirl of snow. Made his peace, perhaps, but peace and healing weren't the same thing. She'd learned that watching Thomas die. That night, she woke to find him sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. She'd taken the bed while he slept in the loft, but clearly sleep eluded him too. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He glanced over. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." She rose, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and joined him by the fire. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind and the pop of burning wood. "Her name was Grace," he said suddenly. "The woman I was going to marry. When I was arrested, her father forbade her to see me. When I got out, she'd already married someone else, moved back east." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Can't blame her. 2 years is a long time to wait for someone who might never come back." Sarah thought of Thomas, of the dreams they'd shared. We all make choices. Some we regret, some we don't, but they're ours to make. Speaking from experience, my parents disowned me when I married Thomas. Said a schoolteacher's daughter had no business marrying a mill worker. But he was a good man, kind and honest. We were happy. Her voice caught. For a while. Caleb reached over and added another log to the fire. His hand brushed hers as he settled back, and neither of them moved away. Such a small thing, that accidental touch, but it sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the flames. "The storm's breaking," he said after a while. "Another day or two, the roads will be passable." Reality crashed back. The roads passable meant she'd have to leave. Go where? Do what? But she couldn't stay here. Couldn't put this man at risk. Morrison wouldn't give up easily. "I'll be ready." She lied. Caleb turned to look at her, and in the firelight, she could see he knew it for a lie. But he simply nodded and said nothing more. The next morning dawned clear for the first time in weeks. Sunlight sparkled on fresh snow, almost blinding in its brilliance. Sarah stood at the window, watching Caleb break trail to the barn, and felt her heart sink. Her time here was ending. She busied herself with chores, trying not to think about leaving. Where would she go? She had no family who'd take her in, no friends in the territory. The $10 hidden in her pack wouldn't last long, but she'd survive this long on her own wits. She'd survive again. When Caleb returned, stomping snow from his boots. She had his lunch ready. He ate quietly, but she could feel him watching her. "There's something I need to say," he began. "Please don't." Sarah turned away. "You've done enough, more than enough. I won't have you feeling obligated." "Damn it, woman! Will you listen?" The sharpness in his tone made her turn. He was standing now, hands clenched at his sides. "I'm not good with words. Haven't had much practice these past years, but He stopped, frustration clear on his face. "What?" she asked softly. "I don't want you to go." The words hung between them like a physical thing. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Caleb, I know it's not proper. I know you're grieving. I know Morrison might come looking. I don't care." He took a step closer. "Stay. Not forever if you don't want. Just stay." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. This good man, offering her shelter, safety, offering more than that, though neither of them was ready to name it. "You don't know what you're asking. Morrison won't just give up. He'll make trouble for you. Let him try. You don't understand. He has the law on his side, bought and paid for." "Sarah," her name on his lips made her shiver. "I've faced worse than Jacob Morrison, and I've spent 6 years alone in these mountains. I'm tired of it." She wanted to say yes, wanted it with a fierce ache that surprised her. But Thomas had been dead barely 2 weeks. What kind of woman did that make her? "I need time," she whispered. "Time I've got plenty of." He moved back, giving her space. "Think on it. Meanwhile, you're not strong enough to travel yet anyway. Stay until you are, then decide." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb grabbed his rifle and headed back out, leaving her alone with her tumbling thoughts. She pressed her hand to the window, watching him disappear into the trees, and wondered when this strange, quiet man had become necessary to her. The glass was cold beneath her palm, but inside, for the first time since Thomas died, she felt warm. The morning sun cast long shadows through the pines as Caleb led Sarah along a narrow trail she hadn't noticed before. He'd been mysterious about their destination, saying only that she needed to see something before making her decision about staying or leaving. "Watch your step here," he said, offering his hand as they navigated a rocky descent. "Ice makes it treacherous." Sarah took his hand without hesitation, noting how natural it had become, this simple trust between them. 2 weeks since he'd pulled her from the snow, and already she couldn't imagine not seeing him across the breakfast table. Couldn't imagine the cabin without his quiet presence. The trail wound downward, following a creek she could hear but not see beneath its coat of ice. Steam rose ahead, unexpected in the winter air, and Sarah caught the scent of minerals. "Almost there," Caleb said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, an almost boyish anticipation. They rounded a final bend, and Sarah gasped. Before them lay a natural pool carved into the rock, steam rising from water that remained impossibly liquid despite the snow all around. The morning light caught the vapor, turning it to gold and silver. "Hot springs," Caleb explained. "Found them my first winter here, only told one other person about them." His voice tightened on the last words, and Sarah knew he meant Grace. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Thought you might like it. Water's plenty warm, and there's a screen of rocks there for privacy if you want." He gestured awkwardly. "I'll go back up the trail. Give you some time." Sarah looked at the steaming water, then at him. 2 weeks of basin baths and melted snow. 2 weeks of grief and fear and strange new feelings. "Stay," she said quietly. "Just turn around." His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded, moving to face the trees. Sarah undressed quickly, folding her clothes on a dry rock. The cold air bit at her skin, making her hurry to the water's edge. The first touch of heat made her gasp. She eased in slowly, letting her body adjust, until she was submerged to her shoulders. The mineral-rich water enveloped her like an embrace, soaking into muscles she hadn't realized were still knotted with tension. "Oh," she sighed, unable to help herself. "This is heaven." She heard Caleb's quiet chuckle. Better than a copper tub, that's certain. Sarah leaned back against a smooth rock, letting the heat work its magic. Snow drifted down from the branches above, hissing as it met the water's surface. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since Thomas's death, felt something like peace. "You can turn around," she said after a while. The water was opaque with minerals, and she was submerged to her neck. "Tell me about finding this place." Caleb settled on a boulder near the pool's edge, carefully keeping his gaze on her face. "That first winter nearly broke me. I'd built the cabin hasty-like, before the snows. Didn't know the land yet, didn't know where to hunt, where to set traps. Come January, I was down to my last bit of cornmeal, half-starved and starting to see things that weren't there." Sarah watched him as he spoke, seeing past the competent frontiersman to the desperate man he'd been. Followed a deer trail one morning, hoping for game. Found this instead, the warmth, after so much cold. He shook his head. "Saved my life. Maybe not just the heat, but the reminder that there was still beauty in the world, still places untouched by ugliness." "You never told anyone else?" "Who would I tell?" His smile was rueful. "The mountains don't get many visitors, and I don't go to town unless I must. But you told Grace." The name hung between them, no longer forbidden but still carrying weight. "I thought we'd come here together someday. After we were married, foolish dreams." Sarah understood foolish dreams. She and Thomas had so many of them. Not foolish, just interrupted. They sat in companionable silence while she soaked. Eventually, reluctantly, she knew she had to get out. The sun was climbing higher, and the day's chores waited. "I need to—" She gestured vaguely. "Of course." Caleb turned immediately, moving back up the trail a ways. Sarah climbed out quickly, the cold air shocking after the warmth. She dried herself with the rough cloth she'd brought and dressed with fingers that fumbled the buttons, but she felt renewed, cleaner than she'd been in weeks, body and spirit both. They walked back slowly, neither speaking. At the cabin, Caleb went to tend the horses while Sarah started dinner. The normalcy of it, the easy rhythm they'd found, made her chest tight with unnamed emotion. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb working on a new trap while Sarah mended one of his shirts, she found herself stealing glances at his hands. Strong hands, capable, but gentle too. She'd felt that gentleness when he'd tended her fever, when he'd helped her from the horse, when he'd offered support on the icy trail. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I was thinking, dangerous habit. Caleb." She set down her mending. "What are we doing?" His hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "This," she gestured between them. "Me here, us acting like what? Like this is normal, like I belong here, like we're—" She stopped, unable to say the word that hovered on her tongue. "Family. Home." Caleb set the trap aside and looked at her directly. In the firelight, his gray eyes seemed almost warm. "Maybe it is normal. Maybe you do belong here." "My husband hasn't been dead 3 weeks." "I know." People would talk, say things about both of us. "Let them. It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Sarah, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. If you need me to be just shelter and safety, I can be that. If you need a friend, I'll be that. If someday you need more—" He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what do you need?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I need to not be alone anymore. I need someone to share the silence with. I need—" He looked away. "I need you to stop looking like you're about to bolt every time I enter a room. I don't—" "You do, like a deer sensing wolves. Can't blame you for it. But I'd never hurt you, Sarah. Need you to know that. I do know that." And she did. This man who'd saved her, tended her, offered her his home. He'd shown her nothing but kindness. The wariness was habit, not fear. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just try to trust me." She nodded, throat tight. They returned to their tasks, but something had shifted. The awareness that had simmered beneath the surface was acknowledged now, if not acted upon. The next day brought clear skies and warming temperatures. The icicles hanging from the eaves began to drip, and the snow settled with tiny, crystalline sounds. Caleb announced he needed to go to his furthest trap line, a journey that would take most of the day. "Will you be all right alone?" he asked, concern evident. "I'm not a child. Caleb, I can manage." But after he left, the cabin felt too quiet. Sarah busied herself with chores, washing, baking bread, organizing the shelves that didn't need organizing. When those were done, she found herself drawn to the small shelf of books in the corner. Most were practical, guides to trapping, a medical handbook, an almanac, but tucked behind them was a slim volume of poetry, its spine worn from handling. She opened it carefully, and a pressed flower fell out. Some kind of mountain wildflower, faded but still holding its shape. On the flyleaf, in feminine handwriting, "Foresee with all my love." G. Sarah stared at the inscription, then carefully replaced the flower and returned the book to its hiding spot. Grace might have married another, but Caleb still kept her token. The thought shouldn't have stung, but it did. When Caleb returned near dusk, Sarah had dinner ready and her emotions under control. He was pleased with his catch, 2 foxes whose pelts would bring good money come spring. They ate and talked of inconsequential things, but Sarah found herself watching him differently, wondering if he still thought of Grace when he read those poems. That night, she lay awake listening to his movements in the loft above. Every creak of the boards, every shift of weight, seemed magnified in the darkness. She thought of Thomas, tried to summon his face clearly, but already the details were fading. What kind of wife forgot so quickly? But then she thought of Caleb's gray eyes, his rare smile, the careful way he moved around her. Thought of how safe she felt here, how the constant fear that had driven her into the storm had faded to nothing. Was it wrong to want that safety? Wrong to want more than safety? Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of warm water and gentle hands. She woke to the sound of splintering wood. Caleb was already down the ladder, rifle in hand, moving to the window. "Get dressed," he said quietly. "Quickly." Sarah didn't argue. She pulled on her dress over her nightgown, shoved her feet into boots. Her hands shook as she tied the laces. "What is it? Someone's at the lean-to." He checked his rifle, then grabbed his revolver from the hook by the door. "Stay here. Bar the door behind me." "Caleb." But he was already gone, moving silent as a shadow into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah barred the door as instructed, then grabbed the shotgun from its place by the fireplace. 2 shells loaded, no more ammunition that she could find. Time crawled. Every sound made her jump, the settling of logs in the fire, the drip of melting snow, her own harsh breathing. Then voices, angry ones. A cry of pain, the sound of struggle. She couldn't stand it. Sarah unbarred the door, shotgun ready, and peered out. In the gray half-light, she could see figures struggling near the lean-to. 3 men, and Caleb on the ground. Without thinking, she stepped out and fired into the air. The boom echoed off the mountains, and the struggling figures froze. "Next one won't be a warning," she called, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. One of the men turned, and her heart sank. Morrison, of course. Beside him stood his pet deputy, and a third man she didn't recognize. Mrs. Whitlow. Morrison tipped his hat mockingly. "We've been looking for you. Worried sick. We were... Get off this land. Now. No need for unpleasantness. We're here legal-like. You abandoned your property, left your husband's body unburied. That's a crime. That is." Caleb stirred, pushing himself to his knees. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were alert, watching for an opening. "I said get off this land," Sarah repeated, lowering the shotgun to aim at Morrison's chest. "You won't shoot me," but he didn't sound entirely certain. "Try me." The deputy's hand moved toward his sidearm. but the third man stopped him. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Morrison's friendly mask slipped, showing the ugliness beneath. "You've caused me considerable trouble. Woman, now you'll come back and face what's coming, or things will get unpleasant for your friend here." Caleb lunged, catching the deputy off guard, wrestling for his gun. The third man moved to help, and Sarah swung the shotgun toward him. "Don't!" But Morrison was already moving, faster than she'd expected. He grabbed for the shotgun barrel, trying to wrench it away. Sarah pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening. Morrison screamed, falling back, clutching his shoulder. The deputy and Caleb were still struggling, rolling in the muddy snow. The third man stood frozen, hands raised. "I'm done," he said quickly. "I'm done. Wasn't signed on for this." Sarah reloaded with shaking hands, keeping the gun on him. "Then get Morrison and get out, now!" The deputy had gone still beneath Caleb, who rose slowly, the deputy's gun in his hand. His face was hard as granite, all traces of gentleness gone. This was the man who'd been too good with a gun, the one others had feared. "You heard the lady," he said quietly. "Take your boss and go. Come back, and we'll bury you in these mountains. No one will ever find you." The third man helped Morrison to his feet. The land agent's face was gray with pain and rage, his fancy coat dark with blood. "This isn't over," he gasped. "I'll have the law on you both. Attempted murder. Self-defense." Caleb corrected. 3 men attacking a woman and her property at dawn. Any judge would see it our way, assuming you lived to find a judge. They loaded Morrison onto his horse, the deputy conscious but groggy, nursing what looked like a broken nose. As they prepared to leave, Morrison turned back. "You're making a mistake. Thorne, I know who you are. What you did, think anyone will believe your word against mine?" Caleb smiled. And it was a terrible thing. They believed it once before. Cost me 2 years. I learned from my mistakes. "Morrison, do you?" They watched until the 3 men disappeared into the trees. Then Caleb turned to her. "You all right?" Sarah nodded, though her knees felt like water. "Your head? I've had worse." He touched the cut gingerly. "That was a hell of a shot." "I was aiming for his chest. Despite everything," he laughed. "Remind me to teach you proper shooting." Then his expression sobered. "This isn't over. He'll be back with more men, or the law, such as it is." "I know." Sarah set the shotgun aside, suddenly exhausted. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door." "No." He caught her shoulders, gentle despite the violence just past. "This isn't your fault. Men like Morrison, they're like rabid dogs. Put 'em down or they just keep biting. What do we do? We prepare, and we make sure if he comes back, he regrets it." He studied her face. "Unless you want to run, I'd understand." "No." The word came out fiercer than intended. "No more running. This is—" She stopped, then forced herself to continue. "This is home now, if you'll have me." Something shifted in his gray eyes, warming them like spring thaw. "Sarah," she kissed him. It was awkward, graceless, both of them too surprised to make it proper. But his lips were warm against hers, and, after a moment of shock, he responded, one hand tangling in her loose hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. Sarah felt heat flood her face. "I shouldn't have—" "Yes," he said roughly. "You should have." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that for days now. Wasn't sure you'd welcome it." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "Part of me still isn't. But Caleb, when I saw you on the ground, when I thought—" Her voice broke. "Shh." He held her tighter. "I'm all right. We're all right." They stood there in the dawn light, blood on the snow around them. Future uncertain, but for that moment, Sarah felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. "Come on," Caleb said finally. "Let's get inside. Clean this cut. Have some coffee. Figure out our next move." Sarah nodded, letting him lead her back to the cabin. At the threshold, She paused, looking back at the blood-stained snow, the mountains rising beyond. No regrets? Caleb asked quietly. She thought of Thomas, of the life they'd planned, of all the dreams that had died with him. Then she looked at this man who'd saved her in more ways than one, who offered her a future when she'd thought she had none. No regrets, she said, and meant it. They went inside together, barring the door against whatever storms might come. The days following Morrison's visit passed intense preparation. Caleb reinforced the cabin's defenses, boarding up the smaller window and creating better sight lines from the others. He taught Sarah to shoot properly, setting up targets against a hillside where the sound wouldn't carry far. "Squeeze, don't pull," he instructed, standing behind her, steadying her aim. "Let your breath out slow and fire between heartbeats." Sarah tried to focus on the target, but his proximity made concentration difficult. Since that morning's kiss, they'd been carefully polite, dancing around what had sparked between them. Neither spoke of it, but the awareness colored every interaction. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the shot went wide. Again, Caleb said patiently, by the 10th shot, she was hitting the target consistently. By the 20th, she could put 3 shots in a space the size of her palm. Caleb nodded approval. "You're a quick study. I had reason to be." She lowered the rifle, flexing her sore shoulder. "Do you really think he'll come back?" "Men like Morrison don't forget being shot, but he'll need time to heal, time to gather men." Caleb took the rifle, checking it with automatic precision. "We've got maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. 2 weeks. Sarah wondered if that would be enough time to prepare for whatever came next. Wondered, too, if it would be enough time to sort through the tangle of emotions that kept her awake at night. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb surprised her by pulling out a worn deck of cards. "Thought you might like a distraction." "I don't know many card games," Sarah admitted. Thomas didn't approve of gambling. No gambling, just something to pass the time. He dealt the cards with practiced ease. "I'll teach you." They played until late, the simple game easing the tension that had lived between them for days. Sarah found herself laughing at Caleb's dry commentary, forgetting for moments at a time the danger that lurked beyond their door. "Where did you learn to play?" she asked, studying her cards. "Army, long nights on patrol. Nothing to do but play cards and tell lies." His mouth quirked. "Got good at both." "The cavalry, you said before?" "3rd Regiment, fought Apaches mostly, down in the territory." His expression darkened. "Ugly business. Things that'd turn your stomach if I told them." "Is that why you left?" "Part of it." He laid down his cards, taking the hand. "Hard to see yourself as the good man when you're burning crops and shooting horses. Harder still when you realize the folks you're fighting just want to keep their land. Same as anyone." Sarah thought of her own lost home, of Morrison's greed. People always want what others have. Some do. He gathered the cards, shuffling again. "Others just want to be left in peace. Which are you? Used to think I was the first kind. Wanted land, money, a reputation." He dealt again. "Movement's precise. Prison changes a man's wants. Now I just want quiet. Want to wake up without looking over my shoulder." "And do you? Wake up without looking?" His gray eyes met hers across the small table. "Lately, yes." The weight in those words made her breath catch. Sarah looked down at her cards, unable to hold his gaze. "Caleb, I know," he said quietly. "Too soon, too fast, but Sarah, I'm not a young man anymore. Don't have the luxury of time to court you proper, and out here," he gestured at the cabin, "the wilderness beyond. Out here, we make our own rules." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you to stay, not just until Morrison's dealt with, not just until spring. Want you to stay permanent." He set down his cards, reaching across to take her hand. "I'm saying I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here. Want to come home to you. Want—" He stopped, jaw working. "Want things I probably got no right to want." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. His hand was warm on hers, calloused but gentle. I can't promise. Not asking for promises, just asking for a chance. She turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. All right. All right. A chance. She squeezed his fingers. That's all either of us can offer right now. It seemed to be enough. They finished their game in comfortable silence, hands touching across the table. When Sarah finally retired, Caleb caught her at the ladder to the loft. Been thinking, he said. Doesn't seem right. You up there in the cold while I've got the warm spot by the fire. We should switch. Caleb Thorne. Are you trying to be a gentleman? Trying. Not sure I remember how. She stood on the first rung, which brought them to eye level. I've been warm enough, but thank you. He nodded, stepping back, but Sarah caught his shirt, pulling him close for a kiss that was softer than their first, but no less meaningful. When she pulled away, his eyes had gone dark. Good night, Caleb. Night. Sarah! She climbed to the loft, heart still racing. Below, she heard him bank the fire. Check the door bars. Go through his nightly routine. Normal sounds that had become precious to her. The next morning brought fresh snow, and with it, an unexpected visitor. Sarah was kneading bread when the horse's whinny alerted them. Caleb grabbed his rifle, peering out the window. Single rider, he reported. Old man, looks like... They waited, tense. As the rider approached, when he came into clearer view, Caleb relaxed slightly. It's Doc Hartley from Cedar Falls. Good man. The doctor was indeed old, well past 60, with white hair and a face carved by weather and years. Caleb met him outside, rifle lowered but ready. Doc, long ride in this weather. Caleb? The doctor dismounted stiffly. Heard you had some trouble up here. News travels. It does when Jacob Morrison shows up at my door with a shoulder full of buckshot, screaming about attempted murder. Doc Hartley's eyes were shrewd. Also heard there was a woman involved, Mrs. Whitlow. Sarah stepped into the doorway. Doctor. Ma'am. He touched his hat. My condolences on your husband. I treated him after the accident. Did what I could. Thank you. Mind if I come in? These old bones aren't what they used to be. Caleb glanced at Sarah, who nodded. They led the doctor inside, Sarah automatically putting coffee on while the men settled by the fire. I'm not here officially, Doc Hartley said, but thought you should know what's being said in town. Let me guess, Caleb said dryly. Morrison's the innocent victim. To hear him tell it, he was merely checking on a distraught widow when he was viciously attacked. The doctor accepted the coffee Sarah offered with grateful hands. Course, explaining why he needed 2 armed men for a welfare check proves tricky. What's the sheriff saying? Sarah asked. Sheriff's saying whatever Morrison pays him to say, but the thing is... Doc Hartley paused, sipping his coffee. Morrison's not as popular as he thinks. Too many widows with similar stories. Too many families pushed off their land, but not enough to stand against him. Caleb guessed. Not openly. No, man's got money, connections. But privately? The doctor shrugged. Let's say if something were to happen to Mr. Morrison, there wouldn't be many tears shed. We're not killers, Doc. Didn't say you were. Just observing. He reached into his coat, pulling out a packet. Brought some medical supplies. Figured you might need them if trouble comes calling again. How much do we owe you? Sarah asked. Nothing. Call it my contribution to neighborly welfare. He finished his coffee and stood. I should go before I missed. But Caleb, you remember Sam Brewster? From the livery? That's him. Seems he recalls owing you a favor from way back. Might be worth remembering, if you need friends. After the doctor left, Sarah and Caleb sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, she asked, can we trust him? Doc's never done me wrong, but trust is a luxury we can't afford much of. He studied the packet of medical supplies. Still, it's good to know not everyone's against us. That afternoon, Caleb decided to check his eastern trap line. Sarah wanted to go with him, but he insisted she stay. Someone needs to watch the cabin, and if I'm not back by dark, you bar everything and don't open for anyone but me. How will I know it's you? He thought for a moment. I'll whistle. Like this. He demonstrated a low, melodic whistle. My mother's favorite hymn. Anyone else tries to whistle it, you'll know it's wrong. Sarah watched him go with increasing unease. The cabin felt too empty without him. Too quiet. She tried to focus on chores, but found herself checking the windows every few minutes. The sun was touching the mountain peaks when she heard horses, multiple horses, moving fast. Sarah grabbed the rifle, heart pounding. Too early for Caleb to return, and coming from the wrong direction. 3 riders burst from the tree line. Not Morrison's men, these were younger, rougher looking. They pulled up short when they saw the cabin, conferring among themselves. Sarah stayed low, watching through a crack in the boards. She couldn't hear their words, but their gestures were clear enough. They were deciding whether to approach. One of them dismounted, walking toward the cabin with studied casualness. "Hello, the house," he called. "Looking for shelter. Happy to pay." Sarah said nothing, rifle ready. "Come on now. We know someone's home. Smoke's coming from the chimney." His voice turned wheeling. "It's mighty cold out here. Christian charity and all that." Still, she remained silent. The man's friendly demeanor slipped. "Playing hard to get? We got ways of warming folks up." He started to draw his sidearm. The rifle shot split the air, kicking up snow at his feet. He jumped back, cursing. "Next one goes higher," Sarah called. "Get off this land." "Now that's not neighborly." Another shot, this one closer. The man scrambled back to his horse. "Crazy woman, you'll regret this." They rode off, but Sarah knew they'd be back. Men like that didn't take rejection well. She maintained her watch as shadows lengthened, praying for Caleb's return. Finally, as full dark fell, she heard it, the low, sweet whistle of a half-remembered hymn. Sarah flew to the door, unbarring it quickly. Caleb entered, taking in her armed stance and pale face. What happened? She told him about the riders. His expression grew darker with each word. "Drifters, from your description. Probably looking for easy pickings." He checked his own weapons. "They'll be back." "I'm sorry. I should have." "You did exactly right." He caught her shoulders. "Sarah, you did perfect. Kept them off. Kept yourself safe. Couldn't ask for more. I was terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being afraid that you make mistakes." He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into his strength. "We'll take turns on watch tonight." "You think they'll come in the dark?" "No. Too risky and unfamiliar terrain. But dawn..." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Dawns when predators hunt." They prepared as best they could. Caleb showed her where he kept extra ammunition, walked her through escape routes if things went bad. They ate a cold supper, not wanting to tend the fire. "If something happens to me," Caleb began. "Don't." "Sarah, listen. If something happens, there's money hidden under the hearthstone. Gold coins. Enough to get you somewhere safe. Promise me you'll run." "I won't leave you. Promise me." She saw the fear in his eyes then, not for himself, but for her. "I promise." She lied. They settled in for the long watch, taking turns dozing while the other kept guard. Sarah's watch came in the deep of night, when every sound seemed magnified. She found herself thinking of Thomas, wondering what he'd make of her now, armed and ready to defend a home that wasn't even hers, allied with a man she'd known mere weeks, but it did feel like hers. The cabin, the life they'd built in these short days. It felt more like home than anywhere since she'd left Ohio. And Caleb felt like coming home after a long journey. "Penny for your thoughts." His voice was soft in the darkness. "Thought you were sleeping. Hard to sleep when you're thinking so loud." He moved to sit beside her at the window. "Regrets?" "No. Questions. Maybe doubts, but not regrets." "What kind of doubts?" Sarah tried to find words for the tangle in her chest. "I loved my husband. Part of me feels like I'm betraying him, being here with you, being happy." "You think he'd want you mourning forever?" "No. Thomas was practical. Kind, but practical. He'd want me safe. She smiled slightly. He'd probably even like you. You're alike in some ways. How so? Good men trying to make something from nothing. Protective, stubborn as old mules. Caleb chuckled quietly. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. She leaned against his shoulder. What about you? Do you see grace when you look at me? Compare us? No. The answer came quick and certain. Grace was... She was young love, all fire and dreams and impossibilities, beautiful, but fragile, like trying to hold smoke. He was quiet for a moment. You're different. Real, strong. You've been tested by life and didn't break. Man gets to my age. He values that more than pretty words and promises. Your age, you talk like you're ancient. Feel it sometimes. 43 come spring. Old enough to know better, too old to start over. He turned to look at her. Except maybe I'm not. Dawn came slowly, pink fingers creeping across the snow. Sarah was dozing against Caleb's shoulder when he tensed. They're coming. The makeshift jail in Cedar Falls was nothing more than a converted storage room behind the sheriff's office, with bars that looked ready to rust through. Sarah sat on the narrow cot, hands folded in her lap, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite the circumstances. They'd brought her in that morning. After the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted, 3 dead drifters, 1 wounded Caleb, and her holding a smoking rifle. The sheriff, a thin man who reeked of whiskey and Morrison's money, had taken one look at the scene and declared her under arrest. For your own protection, he'd said, though they both knew better. Caleb had tried to fight them, even wounded as he was, but she'd stopped him. No sense in both of them being locked up. He needed to heal, to plan, to find help if any existed. The door to the sheriff's office opened, bringing cold air and the sound of boots. Morrison appeared at her cell, arm in a sling, face pale but triumphant. Mrs. Whitlow. Comfortable accommodations, I hope. Sarah didn't dignify that with a response. Such a shame. He continued, moving closer to the bars. A widow, driven mad by grief, taking up with a known killer. Who knows what delusions filled your pretty head? The only delusion was thinking you'd leave us in peace. Morrison's smile was thin. Peace is earned, my dear, or bought. You chose neither. He leaned against the bars. But I'm a reasonable man. We could still come to an arrangement. I'd rather hang. That can be arranged too. His mask slipped, showing the ugliness beneath. Do you know what they do to women in territorial prison? Pretty thing like you wouldn't last a week. Is that meant to frighten me? It's meant to educate you. He straightened his coat. The circuit judge arrives next week, known for his harsh sentences, especially for women who forget their place. But if you were to sign over your late husband's land, express remorse for your recent adventures, perhaps mercy could be found. My husband's land was stolen. We both know it. I know what the papers say, and papers don't lie. He smiled again. Think on it. Mrs. Whitlow. You have time, not much, but some. After he left, Sarah allowed herself a moment of despair. The cell walls seemed to press closer, the air thick with the smell of old wood and older fear. She thought of Caleb, wondered if his wound was being properly tended. Doc Hartley had promised to look after him, but promises meant little when power and money were involved. Night fell early, bringing bitter cold. The single blanket on her cot did little against the chill seeping through the walls. Sarah wrapped it tight and tried to sleep, but every sound made her start. Drunks passing by outside, the deputies snoring from the front room, the scuttle of mice in the walls. Near midnight, a different sound, a soft tap at the barred window high on the wall. Mrs. Whitlow? A woman's voice, barely a whisper. Sarah stood on the cot, peering through the bars. A face looked back, young, worried, wrapped in a dark shawl. I'm Martha Brewster. Sam's daughter. Doc Hartley sent me. Sarah's heart leaped. Is Caleb? He's mending. Fever broke this morning. He wanted to come himself, but Doc's got him tied to the bed practically." The girl glanced around nervously. "I can't stay long, but he wanted you to know he's working on something. Says to hold on. Tell him." Sarah's throat tightened. "Tell him I'm all right." "I will." "And Mrs. Whitlow, my PA says to tell you Morrison's not as secure as he thinks. Some of us remember what he did to the Johnsons, the Clearys. We're tired of it." Then she was gone, leaving Sarah with the first hope she'd felt since the cell door clanged shut. The next days passed in a blur of cold and hunger. The deputy brought one meal a day, thin gruel and hard bread, barely enough to keep body and soul together. Sarah spent her time pacing the small cell, doing what exercises she could to keep warm, and scratching marks on the wall to track the days. On the fourth day, she had visitors. The sheriff brought in 3 people: Mayor Hoffman, a self-important man with soft hands; Reverend Pike, whose judgment sat heavy on his brow; and Mrs. Abernathy, president of the Ladies' Temperance Society. "Mrs. Whitlow," the mayor began, "we're here to assess your situation. My situation is that I'm falsely imprisoned." Now, Reverend Pike interjected, his voice oily with false concern. "We understand you've been through trials. Losing your husband, the isolation. It's natural for a woman's mind to become unbalanced." Sarah bit back her first response. "My mind is quite sound. Reverend, is it?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice cut like glass. "A decent woman doesn't take up with strange men weeks after her husband's death. Doesn't engage in shootouts like some common outlaw. I defended myself." "You forgot yourself," the woman corrected. "Forgot your place, your morals, your duty to your departed husband's memory. What would you have had me do? Starve, freeze, submit to Morrison's advances?" The mayor coughed uncomfortably at the last. Even he couldn't pretend ignorance of Morrison's reputation. "You could have sought proper help," Reverend Pike said. "The church, the town. Instead, you chose to live in sin with a man of violent reputation." "I chose to live," Sarah said simply. "If that's a sin, then I'll answer for it to God, not to you." Mrs. Abernathy gasped at her boldness. The Reverend's face darkened. "Pride goeth before a fall. Young woman. Then I'll fall standing up." They left soon after, clearly marking her as beyond redemption. Sarah sank onto the cot, exhausted by the effort of defiance, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of her tears. That night, her dinner came with something extra, a small rolled paper hidden beneath the bowl. Sarah waited until the deputy retreated before unrolling it. "Hold fast. Friends gathering. Sunday service. See." Caleb's handwriting, barely literate but unmistakable. Sarah pressed the note to her chest, then carefully tore it to pieces and swallowed them. No evidence left behind. Sunday dawned bright and bitter cold. Sarah could hear the church bells calling the faithful to service. She wondered if Caleb was well enough to move, what friends he'd found, what hope existed in this hostile town. The sheriff appeared at her cell near noon, keys jangling. "Got a visitor. Mind your manners." He led her to a small room she hadn't seen before, probably meant for lawyer consultations. Sitting at the scarred table was a man she didn't recognize. Tall, graying, with the bearing of former military. "Mrs. Whitlow, I'm Colonel Marcus Bradford, retired. I served with Caleb Thorne in the 3rd Cavalry." Sarah's pulse quickened. "He's spoken of his service." "I imagine he has, though probably not the whole truth." Bradford studied her with sharp eyes. "Caleb saved my life twice in the territory. Once from Apaches, once from my own stupidity. I owe him debts I can never repay." "Why are you here?" "Because he asked, and because I've done some checking on Jacob Morrison." He pulled out a leather portfolio. "Interesting man. You're Mr. Morrison. Did you know he's wanted for land fraud in Kansas? Changed his name, but the description fits." Hope flared in Sarah's chest. "Can you prove it?" "Working on it. Telegraph's a wonderful invention, but proof takes time, and the circuit judge arrives tomorrow." He leaned forward. "Caleb has a plan. Risky, but might be your only chance. Are you willing to trust him?" Always. Bradford smiled slightly. He said you'd say that. All right then. Tomorrow, during the trial, be ready. When you hear the church bells ring, and they shouldn't be ringing during court, that's your signal. Signal for what? To duck. He wouldn't say more. And soon the sheriff returned to take her back. Sarah spent the rest of the day in anxious preparation, not knowing what to prepare for. That night, she barely slept. Every sound could be the beginning of whatever Caleb planned. But dawn came quiet, bringing only the usual sounds of the town waking. The sheriff came for her early. Time to face the music. The courtroom was the town hall, hastily rearranged with benches for spectators. Sarah was surprised to see it nearly full. Morrison sat in the front row, looking satisfied. Mrs. Abernathy and her temperance ladies filled one section, faces pinched with disapproval. But there were others too. Doc Hartley, Sam Brewster and his daughter. Several families she didn't recognize, but who watched her with something like sympathy. And in the back, barely visible, Colonel Bradford. No sign of Caleb. Sarah's heart sank. The judge entered, a heavy man with the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. He banged his gavel perfunctorily. The Territory versus Sarah Whitlow. Charges of disturbing the peace, assault with a deadly weapon, moral turpitude, and conspiracy to commit murder. How does the defendant plead? Sarah stood. Not guilty. So noted. Mr. Prosecutor, your case. The prosecutor, clearly in Morrison's pocket, painted a lurid picture, a deranged widow, driven mad by grief, taking up with a known killer, attacking innocent men who only sought to help. 3 men are dead, he thundered. Shot down in cold blood by this woman and her paramour. What message does it send if we allow such behavior to go unpunished? Witnesses were called. Morrison testified to his concern for Sarah, his shock at being shot. The surviving drifter claimed they'd only wanted directions, even Mrs. Abernathy testified to Sarah's moral decay. Sarah had no lawyer, no witnesses on her behalf. The judge barely looked at her, clearly considering this a formality. Does the defendant wish to speak? Sarah stood. I do. She'd prepared words, but looking at the hostile faces, she forgot them all. Instead, she spoke from her heart. My husband died because Jacob Morrison wanted our land. When I wouldn't submit to his advances, he drove me out in a blizzard. Caleb Thorne saved my life, asking nothing in return. We defended ourselves against men who would have... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Who meant us harm? If that's a crime, then the law means nothing. The law, Morrison called out, protects decent folk from the likes of you. That's when the church bells began to ring. The sound was wrong, not the measured toll of Sunday service, but wild. Urgent clanging. People turned, confused. The judge frowned, banging his gavel. What in tarnation? The doors burst open. Caleb stood there, pale but steady, flanked by Sam Brewster and several other men, all armed. Sorry to interrupt, Judge, Caleb said, but new evidence has come to light. The sheriff reached for his gun, but Doc Hartley was already behind him, pressing something to his back. I'd think twice, Sheriff. This is highly irregular, the judge blustered. So is trying an innocent woman, Colonel Bradford said, stepping forward. I have here telegrams from Kansas. Jacob Morrison, or should I say, Jacob Morris, is wanted for fraud, theft, and suspected murder. Morrison was on his feet. Lies. Really? Bradford pulled out a photograph. This was taken in Topeka 2 years ago. Familiar face, despite the beard. The courtroom erupted. Morrison tried to run but found his way blocked by townspeople who'd suffered under his schemes. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! Caleb moved through the chaos to Sarah's side. You all right? Better now. She gripped his hand. Though we may have just made things worse. Trust me. The judge finally restored order. Though the atmosphere had completely changed, Morrison was now under guard, his bravado cracking. In light of new information, the judge said carefully, I'm inclined to postpone this trial pending investigation. No need, Caleb said. Mrs. Whitlow acted in self-defense. I was there. I'll testify to it. So will others. As for the moral turpitude, he looked at Sarah, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. I aim to marry her, if she'll have me. Nothing improper about a man protecting his intended. The courtroom went silent. Sarah stared at him, heart hammering. Well? He asked softly. Will you? Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes. This time the eruption was different. Some cheers mixed with the gasps. The judge looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. This is highly— Your Honor, Colonel Bradford interrupted smoothly. I think you'll find the territorial governor takes a dim view of wrongful prosecution, especially of war widows, especially when the accuser is a wanted criminal. The threat was subtle but clear. The judge hemmed and hawed, then banged his gavel. Charges dismissed. Sheriff, take Mr. Morrison into custody pending verification of these allegations. Court adjourned. Pandemonium. Sarah found herself surrounded by people, some offering congratulations, others still hostile but held back by the tide of change. Through it all, Caleb's hand remained steady in hers. They made their way outside, where the sun seemed impossibly bright after the dim courtroom. Sarah breathed deep, tasting freedom. That was quite a risk, she said. Worth it. Caleb touched the bandage still visible beneath his shirt. Though Doc Hartley near skinned me alive for getting up. How did you manage it? The townspeople? The evidence? Turns out Morrison made more enemies than friends. Just needed someone to stand up first. He smiled slightly. And Bradford's telegraph contacts didn't hurt. And the proposal? His smile faded, replaced by uncertainty. Too much? I know it soon. Sarah silenced him with a kiss. There in the street for all to see. Let them talk. She was done caring about propriety. When they parted, he was grinning. That a yes to the proposal or just the kiss? Both. Though we should probably court a bit first. Do things proper-like. Sarah Whitlow. Nothing about us has been proper from the start. No, she agreed, linking her arm through his. And I wouldn't have it any other way. They started down the street toward Doc Hartley's, where Caleb had been staying. Behind them, Morrison's shouts echoed as the sheriff dragged him away. Ahead, the mountains rose clean and white, promising home. My strength is gone, Sarah murmured, remembering that desperate night in the snow. What's that? Something I said when you found me. My strength is gone. I was wrong. She looked up at him, this man who'd given her a second chance at life. I just needed to find a different kind of strength. Caleb squeezed her hand. We both did. They walked on together, leaving the courthouse and all it represented behind. There would be more challenges. Winter wasn't over, and building a life together wouldn't be easy. But for now, in the bright mountain sun, with freedom restored and love acknowledged, it was enough. More than enough. The cave was little more than a hollow in the rock face, but it sheltered them from the wind that howled like wolves through the canyon. Sarah had made Caleb as comfortable as possible, piling their blankets beneath him, but his fever had returned with vengeance, and nothing she did seemed to help. They'd fled town 3 days ago when Morrison's associates came seeking revenge. Despite his arrest, the man still had friends, and the sheriff had made it clear he couldn't or wouldn't protect them. So they'd taken what supplies they could carry and headed deeper into the mountains, hoping to reach Caleb's cabin before pursuit caught up. But Caleb's wound, barely healed, had reopened during their flight. Now infection raged through his body, and they were trapped by another blizzard, miles from any help. Sarah, his voice was barely a whisper, rough with fever. I'm here. She squeezed water from a cloth and pressed it to his burning forehead. Their water was running low, but she couldn't think about that now. You need to go. Leave me. Don't start that again. I'm dying. The words came out flat, matter of fact. No sense in both of us. You're not dying. Sarah forced conviction into her voice that she didn't feel. "You're too stubborn to die." He managed a weak smile. "Man can't live on stubbornness alone. Then it's good you have me too." She checked his bandages again. The wound was angry red, seeping. She'd used the last of Doc Hartley's supplies yesterday. Now all she had was whiskey for cleaning and prayer for healing. Caleb drifted in and out of consciousness as the day wore on. Sometimes he called for grace, reliving old memories. Once he spoke to men from his cavalry days, warning them about an ambush. Sarah held his hand through it all, talking to him about anything she could think of, her childhood in Ohio, the books she'd loved, the gardens she'd plant come spring. "When we get back to the cabin," she said, "I'll make that venison stew you like, with wild onions and those herbs you showed me. We'll sit by the fire and play cards, and you'll let me win sometimes." "Never," he mumbled. "No charity wins. Stubborn man." Night fell, bringing deeper cold. Sarah built up their small fire as much as she dared, but fuel was scarce in the cave. She'd have to venture out tomorrow, weather permitting. The thought terrified her, leaving Caleb alone, vulnerable, but without wood. They'd freeze. She curled against his side, trying to share her warmth. His skin felt like flame against hers, yet he shivered constantly. In the firelight, his face looked gaunt, shadows pooling beneath his eyes. "Tell me about her," Sarah said quietly. "Grace." Caleb's eyes opened, focusing with effort. "Why?" "Because she was important to you, because knowing her helps me know you." He was quiet so long she thought he'd drifted off again. Then, she had yellow hair, like corn silk, always smelled of lemon verbena. His voice was distant, dreamy. "Played piano, Chopin mostly, said my hands were too rough for gentle things." She was wrong. No, she was right. These hands. He lifted one hand weakly, studying it. Done too much violence. She saw it. I see healing hands, capable hands, hands that saved me. Sarah. He turned to look at her, and for a moment his eyes cleared. "If I don't, stop. Listen, please." He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "The strongbox under the hearthstone. There's enough there to get you somewhere safe. California, maybe. Start fresh." "I'm not going to California." "Could teach school again. Find a good man. Have those children you talked about." Tears burned her eyes. "I found a good man. The only children I want are yours. Sarah, no, you don't get to give up. You don't get to make me love you and then leave." The tears spilled over. "That's not fair. Life's not fair. Then we make it fair. We fight. Both of us." She pressed her forehead to his. "Please, Caleb, please don't leave me." He lifted a trembling hand to her cheek. "Try not to. Promise." Sarah stayed awake through the long night, monitoring his breathing, keeping the fire alive. When dawn came pale through the storm, she knew she had to act. Caleb was worse, barely responsive. Without medicine, without proper help, he'd die within days. She bundled herself in every layer they had and ventured out into the blizzard. The wind nearly knocked her down immediately, but she pushed forward, gathering what deadwood she could find. On her third trip, she noticed something else. Tracks, old ones, nearly filled with snow, but definitely human. Following them led to a small shelter built into the hillside, a trapper's cache. Abandoned but stocked with supplies. Sarah nearly cried with relief. Jerky, hardtack, even a small pot of honey. Better still, a packet of willow bark, and what looked like dried herbs she recognized from Doc Hartley's supplies. She gathered what she could carry and fought her way back to the cave. Caleb hadn't moved, but he still breathed. Sarah quickly built up the fire and set snow to melting. She made a tea from the willow bark, strong and bitter, and managed to get some down his throat. "Found supplies," she told him, though she wasn't sure he heard. "We're going to be all right. You hear me? We're going to be all right." The day passed in a blur of tending fire, forcing tea and thin broth between his lips, changing his bandages. The herbs made a poultice that smelled sharp and medicinal. Sarah had no idea if she was using them correctly, but anything was better than watching infection spread. That night, his fever spiked dangerously. Caleb thrashed and muttered, fighting invisible enemies. Sarah held him down. Terrified, he'd reopen the wound further. "No!" he shouted suddenly. "Clear as day. Behind you! Williams! Behind you!" "Shh! It's all right. You're safe. Gotta warn them. Apache War Party, got to— You did warn them. Everyone's safe. Rest now." He subsided, but his breathing was labored, rattling in his chest. Sarah had heard that sound before, sitting beside Thomas, the sound of a body giving up. "No," she said fiercely. "Not again. You hear me? Not again." She stripped off her outer clothes and lay against him, skin to skin, trying to regulate his temperature. It was improper, scandalous, but propriety had no place here. She wrapped them both in every blanket and held on tight. "Feel that?" she whispered. "That's my heart beating, strong and steady. You match it. Caleb Thorne, you match it and come back to me." Hours passed. The fire died to embers. But Sarah didn't dare move to tend it. She talked constantly, telling him every thought in her head, every memory, every dream for their future. "We'll add onto the cabin come spring. A real bedroom, maybe a loft for children. I'll teach them to read, and you'll teach them to track and hunt. Summers. We'll take them to the hot springs. Winters. We'll tell stories by the fire." His breathing seemed to ease slightly, encouraged. She kept going. "I'll plant roses by the door, yellow ones, like my mother grew, and vegetables, beans, squash, corn if the season's long enough. You'll complain about having to fence it against deer, but you'll do it anyway." Hate, fences. The words were barely audible. Sarah's heart leaped. Then no fences. Let the deer have their share. Soft, heart, only for you. He managed to turn his head slightly, pressing his face into her hair. "Smell good, like home. I am home. You're home. We're home together." "Together," he repeated, and his arm tightened fractionally around her. The crisis passed near dawn. Sarah woke from an exhausted doze to find Caleb's skin cooler, his breathing deeper and more regular. She nearly sobbed with relief. "Water," he croaked. She helped him drink, then checked his wound. Still angry, but the spreading redness had stopped. The poultice had done its work. Or maybe her prayers, or maybe just his own stubborn refusal to quit. "You stayed," he said wonderingly. "Where else would I go?" "California, you said." "I lied." She smoothed his hair back. "I'm a terrible liar." "Good thing, like honest women." The storm broke that afternoon, sun streaming through the clouds like a blessing. Sarah ventured out again, this time returning with an armload of wood and more supplies from the trapper's cache. She even managed to snare a rabbit, though Caleb would have laughed at her clumsy technique. She made a proper stew with the meat and some wild onions she'd found. Caleb managed to eat a few spoonfuls, the first solid food he'd taken in days. "Tastes good," he said. "You're learning. I had a good teacher. Sarah." His expression grew serious. "What I said about Grace. You were feverish. It doesn't matter." "It does." He caught her hand. She was the past, a boy's dream of what love should be. "You're real. You're now. You're the woman who stayed through the worst of it. Always will." "I know." He brought her hand to his lips. "That's the miracle of it. They stayed in the cave 3 more days, until Caleb was strong enough to travel. Sarah fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, though he protested he could walk. "Humor me," she said. "I've gotten used to giving orders. Notice that. Might have to do something about it when I'm better." "You can try." The journey back to the cabin took 2 days instead of the usual one. But they made it. The sight of that familiar roof through the trees nearly undid Sarah's composure. Home. They were home. She got Caleb settled in bed, the real bed. She insisted, not his usual spot by the fire. He was asleep almost instantly, worn out by the journey. Sarah stood watching him for a long moment, seeing the new lines pain had carved in his face, the gray threading through his hair. He'd almost died. They'd both almost died. but they'd survived. Together. She moved quietly around the cabin, setting things to rights. The place had been searched. Morrison's men, probably, but not ransacked. Her few possessions were scattered. His papers rifled through, but the important things remained, including the strongbox under the hearthstone. She noted with relief their future, hidden in plain sight. As night fell, she made tea and brought it to the bedroom. Caleb was awake, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "Thought I dreamed it," he said. "Being home, you being here. No dream?" She sat on the bed's edge. "Though we need to talk about what comes next. Morrison's men will be dealt with. Bradford sent word before we left. Federal marshals are coming. Real law, not Morrison's bought men." He shifted, wincing. "Might take time, but this territory's changing, getting civilized. Not too civilized, I hope." He smiled. "No danger of that, not up here." His expression grew thoughtful. "Sarah, that night in the cave, what you did, what any woman would do for the man she loves." The words hung between them, simple and true. Caleb reached for her, and she went willingly into his arms, careful of his wound. "Love you too," he said against her hair, in case that wasn't clear. It was clear. She pressed closer, feeling his heart beat strong and steady. "But it's nice to hear." They held each other as darkness settled over the mountains, safe in their cabin, in their love, in the future they'd fought so hard to claim. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside was warmth and light, and the promise of spring to come. Sarah thought of that desperate night when she'd fled into the blizzard. Sure, her strength was gone. How wrong she'd been. Strength wasn't just surviving. It was choosing to love again, to hope again, to build something new from the ashes of loss. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked drowsily. "That I'm glad I got lost in that storm. Strange thing to be glad for. Not strange at all." She kissed his throat, feeling his pulse steady beneath her lips. "It led me home." His arms tightened around her, and no more words were needed. They'd found their way through blizzards and bullets, fever and fear. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. In the morning, she'd check the supplies, plan for the rest of winter. Maybe even start that letter to her parents she'd been putting off. But for now, she was content to lie in Caleb's arms, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep, feeling the solid reality of their survival. The mountains stood guard around them, the cabin walls strong against the storm, and love unexpected. Hard-won, but absolutely certain, kept them warm through the night. The courthouse in Cedar Falls looked different in spring sunlight, less forbidding, though Sarah still felt her stomach tighten as she approached. This time, however, she walked freely. Caleb at her side, Colonel Bradford leading the way. "The territorial prosecutor's already here," Bradford said. "Came in on yesterday's stage. Morrison's trial starts tomorrow, but he wanted to clear up your situation first." "Our situation," Caleb corrected. His hand found Sarah's, steady and reassuring. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with activity. Federal marshals had indeed arrived, bringing with them a new order that had Morrison's cronies running scared. The sheriff who'd arrested Sarah was gone, fled in the night when word came of his own pending charges. They were led to a small office where a severe-looking man in spectacles waited. "Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Whitlow, I'm Prosecutor Jameson. Please, sit." He opened a thick file. "I've reviewed your case thoroughly. The charges against you were clearly fabricated, and given Mr. Morrison's extensive criminal history, no jury would convict. However, there's the matter of the 3 men killed at your cabin." Sarah tensed, but Jameson continued. "Fortunately, we have witnesses. The Brewster girls saw those men in town, making threats. Doc Hartley can testify to the defensive nature of the wounds. Clear self-defense." "So we're free to go?" Caleb asked. "Almost. There's one more matter." Jameson pulled out another document. "Morrison claims ownership of the Whitlow property. Says he holds the deed." "He's lying," Sarah said hotly. "That land was bought and paid for. I believe you, but without proof. Jameson spread his hands. Morrison was clever. The original paperwork seems to have vanished. Sarah's heart sank. After everything, to lose Thomas's land still. Actually, a familiar voice said from the doorway, that's not entirely true. They turned to find Sam Brewster entering, followed by his daughter Martha. The girl carried a leather satchel, which she handed to the prosecutor. My Martha's been working as a seamstress, Sam explained. Does mending for folks, including Morrison. Found these sewn into the lining of his coat. Jameson opened the satchel, pulling out papers. His eyebrows rose. Well, original deeds, receipts, several documents that should have been filed with the land office. He looked up at Sarah. Mrs. Whitlow, not only is your husband's land clear, but it appears Morrison owes you considerable money in damages. Sarah sagged against Caleb, relief making her weak. It's over. Nearly, you'll need to testify at Morrison's trial, but yes, your legal troubles are finished. Jameson's stern face softened slightly. The territory owes you an apology. Ma'am, what happened here was a travesty of justice. They left the courthouse in a daze. Outside, townspeople gathered, word having spread. Some looked ashamed, remembering how they'd treated Sarah. Others, like the Brewsters, smiled encouragement. Buy you folks a meal, Sam offered. Least we can do. They ate at the hotel restaurant, a luxury Sarah hadn't experienced in months. Conversation flowed easier than she'd expected, Martha chattering about her sewing work, Sam discussing plans for expanding his livery. Town's changing, he said. Morrison's arrest opened people's eyes. We're forming a proper town council, gonna elect a real sheriff. Maybe you folks would consider being part of it. We're mountain people, Caleb said diplomatically. But we appreciate the thought. After the meal, they visited Doc Hartley to thank him properly. The old doctor examined Caleb's healing wound, pronouncing it satisfactory. You did good work, he told Sarah. Ever consider studying medicine proper? I had my hands full keeping this one alive. And a fine job you did, but think on it. Territory needs doctors, and you've got the steady nerves for it. They spent the night at the hotel, separate rooms for propriety, though Sarah found herself lying awake, missing Caleb's presence. Strange how quickly she'd grown accustomed to sharing space, sharing life. Morrison's trial began the next morning. The courthouse was packed, everyone wanting to see the man who'd terrorized them brought low. Morrison sat shackled, his fine clothes replaced by prison gray, his arrogance cracked but not broken. Sarah testified first, recounting Thomas's death, Morrison's threats, her flight into the storm. She kept her voice steady, meeting Morrison's glare without flinching. When the prosecutor asked about her time with Caleb, she answered honestly. He saved my life, gave me shelter without condition, protected me when Morrison's men came. Any impropriety existed only in the minds of those looking for scandal. Caleb testified next, his military bearing evident as he recounted the attacks on their cabin. Other witnesses followed. Doc Hartley, the Brewsters, even some of Morrison's former associates who'd turned state's evidence to save themselves. The most damning testimony came from a woman named Helen Cleary, whose husband had died mysteriously after refusing to sell Morrison their farm. He came to me after, she said, voice shaking. Said I could work off the debt he claimed we owed. When I refused. She lifted her chin. I lost my home, my reputation. Had to leave my children with relatives back east, all because I wouldn't become his mistress. By noon, Morrison's guilt was clear. The jury retired briefly, returning with guilty verdicts on all charges. The judge, a different one, brought in from the territorial capital, sentenced him to 25 years hard labor. As the marshals led Morrison out, he passed close to Sarah and Caleb. This isn't over, he hissed. Yes, Caleb said calmly. It is. They stayed for the town meeting that evening, where apologies were offered and accepted. Mrs. Abernathy, leader of the temperance society that had condemned Sarah, stood with tears in her eyes. I was wrong, she said simply. Let my righteousness blind me to real evil. I hope someday you can forgive me." "Already done," Sarah said, meaning it. Holding grudges took energy better spent on living. The next morning, they prepared to leave. Their wagon was loaded with supplies, gifts from townspeople eager to make amends. Sarah had mixed feelings as they drove out of Cedar Falls. This place had nearly broken her, but it had also led her to Caleb. "Regrets?" he asked, eerily echoing that morning months ago. "None. You?" "Got everything I need right here." They made good time, reaching the cabin by late afternoon. Everything stood as they'd left it, waiting patiently for their return. Sarah felt tension she hadn't known she carried finally ease as they crossed the threshold. "Home," she said softly. "Home," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb cleared his throat. "Been thinking. Dangerous habit. Woman's got jokes now." But he smiled. "Thinking about what comes next. We talked about marriage before, but that was partly for the trial. Want to know if the offer still stands?" Sarah set down her mending. "Are you proposing properly this time?" He stood, then surprised her by dropping to one knee. From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's. Been carrying it around for weeks, trying to find the right words." He looked up at her, gray eyes vulnerable. "Sarah Whitlow, you've seen me at my worst, nursed me through fever, stood by me through violence, made this empty cabin into a home. I'm not much for pretty speeches, but I love you true. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision. "Yes, of course yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, then rose to kiss her. It was different from their desperate kisses during danger. This was promise, commitment, future. "When?" she asked when they parted. "Soon as possible. Could ride to the mission tomorrow if you want, or wait for a proper church wedding in town." Sarah thought of standing before the townspeople again, making vows for their judgment. The mission sounds perfect. They were married 3 days later at the small mission church 20 miles west. Father Miguel, ancient but sharp-eyed, performed the ceremony with only Sam and Martha Brewster as witnesses. It was simple, quiet, exactly right. That night, finally, truly alone as husband and wife, they came together with a passion born of long denial and near loss. Sarah had worried it might feel wrong, too soon after Thomas, but instead it felt like coming full circle. Life after death, joy after sorrow. "My wife," Caleb murmured against her skin, wonder in his voice. "My husband," she replied, equally amazed. They made love with windows open to the spring air, mountain breezes cooling heated skin. Afterward, they lay entwined, planning their future. "Want to add that room you talked about?" Caleb asked. "Could start cutting timber soon." After the gardens planted, priorities. Practical woman. "Why I married you." Just for that. He showed her other reasons until they were both breathless and laughing. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sarah planted her garden while Caleb began work on the addition. They worked side by side, building their life board by board, seed by seed. One evening, Sarah was writing in her journal when Caleb looked over her shoulder. "What's that?" "Our story. Thought I might send it to that newspaper in Denver. People should know what really happened here." "Think they'll publish it?" "Maybe. Change the names. Of course. Called myself a widow. You a mysterious mountain man." "Mysterious?" he snorted. "Nothing mysterious about me." "I don't know. Man saves woman from blizzard, nurses her to health, fights off villains, wins her heart. Sounds like a romance novel. Our life's no novel, too messy for that." "The best stories are messy," Sarah said, closing the journal. "Clean endings are for fairy tales. Real love is complicated." He pulled her onto his lap. "Speaking of complicated, been meaning to tell you, Colonel Bradford wrote, they're looking for territorial marshals. Offered me a position." Sarah tensed. "What did you say?" "That I'd talk to my wife." He studied her face. "It'd mean traveling some, maybe danger, but legal work this time, helping build real law out here." She thought about it, weighing safety against purpose. Would you be happy just farming and trapping forever? If you're here, yes, but, he shrugged. Man likes to feel useful, and maybe it's time I stopped hiding from what I'm good at. Then accept. We'll manage the traveling. Make the danger worth it. She kissed him. Just promise to always come home. Always. He vowed. As spring turned toward summer, their new life took shape. The garden flourished, the room addition grew, and Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb at the hot springs, watching joy and terror war in his expression. A baby, he said wonderingly. Never thought I'd... Are you happy? Terrified, she admitted. But yes, happy. You? Same. He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. We'll figure it out. Together. Together, she agreed. That night, Sarah stood outside their cabin, looking at the stars. So much had changed since that desperate flight into the blizzard. She'd lost one life and found another. Lost one love and discovered a deeper one. My strength is gone, she whispered to the night sky. Remembering, but she'd been wrong then. Strength wasn't something that could be lost or found. It was something built, day by day, choice by choice. Caleb joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. What are you thinking? About strength, about choices, about how lucky we are. Luck had nothing to do with it. We fought for this. Yes, she agreed, leaning into his warmth. We did. The mountains stood eternal around them, guardians of their hard-won happiness. Inside, their home waited, no longer a refuge from storms, but a foundation for the future. Their future, growing now beneath her heart, built on love tested by fire and proved true. Whatever came next, marshalling duties, childbirth, the ordinary struggles of life, they'd face as they'd faced everything else, together, with strength neither could manage alone. Sarah turned in Caleb's arms, kissing him under the vast Montana sky. Take me to bed, husband. Gladly, wife. They went inside, barring the door against the night. Not from fear now, but from habit. The dangers they'd survived had passed. What remained was life. Complicated, messy, beautiful life. And they were ready for all of it. Spring had dressed the valley in wildflowers when Sarah felt the first stirring of new life within her. She stood in her flourishing garden, hands pressed to the gentle swell of her belly, marveling at how much had changed in just 1 year. The tomatoes were already setting fruit. Beans climbed their poles with eager green fingers, and the herbs Caleb had helped her transplant from the wild filled the air with fragrance. Caught you daydreaming again, Caleb said, approaching from the new addition. Sawdust clung to his shirt, and his face glowed with the satisfaction of hard work. The room was nearly finished. Their bedroom, private and sturdy, with a window facing east to catch the morning light. Not daydreaming, planning. Sarah gestured at the garden. We'll have enough preserve to last 2 winters, especially with... She touched her stomach again. Caleb's face softened as it always did when reminded of the baby. He pulled her close, mindful of her changing body. How are you feeling today? Strong, happy, a little scared. Doc Hartley said everything looks fine. Martha Brewster's agreed to come help when your time comes. I know. It's not that kind of scared. Sarah leaned into his warmth. It's the good kind, the kind that means something wonderful is coming. They stood together, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Caleb had taken the marshal position but limited his territory to the nearby settlements, rarely gone more than a few days. It was a compromise that satisfied them both. He could serve the law while still being a husband, soon to be a father. I have something for you, Sarah said, pulling away. Wait here. She returned from the cabin with a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather journal, carefully bound, with pages covered in her neat handwriting. Our story, she said as he opened it. From the beginning. I sent a copy to that Denver newspaper. Like I mentioned, they want to publish it as a serial. Caleb read the first page, eyebrows rising. Desert Rose of the Mountains by S. J. Thompson. Pseudonym. Thought it best to keep some privacy. She watched anxiously as he read. Do you mind? I changed enough details to protect us, but the heart of it's true. Mind. Sarah, this is... He looked up, eyes bright with emotion. This is our life turned into art. It's beautiful. Even the parts about you being stubborn and impossible, especially those parts, they're accurate. She laughed, swatting his arm. They're paying $20 for the full serial. I thought we could save it for the baby. Our child, born to a published author. Caleb shook his head in wonder. You never cease to amaze me. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the trail, Colonel Bradford, making one of his periodic visits. They welcomed him with coffee and Sarah's fresh-baked bread, catching up on territorial news. Morrison died in prison, Bradford said quietly. Tried to escape, fell from the wall, broken neck. Sarah felt no satisfaction in the news, only a kind of hollow finality. His choices killed him, not us. Wise perspective. Bradford turned to Caleb. Speaking of choices, there's talk of statehood coming soon. They'll need good men in government positions. Interested? In politics? Caleb snorted. I'd rather wrestle a grizzly. Thought you'd say that. Still, offer stands if you change your mind. Bradford smiled at Sarah. How's the writing coming? My wife read your story in the Denver Post. Couldn't put it down. Sarah blushed. Just telling tales. Important tales. People need to know the real West isn't just gunfights and gold rushes. It's people building lives, finding love, making homes. He stood to leave. You two are proof that civilization can bloom anywhere, even in the wilderness. After he left, they returned to their work, Caleb to the edition, Sarah to her journal. She'd started a new story, this one about a woman doctor fighting prejudice in a mining camp. Fiction, but rooted in the strength she'd found in herself. As evening approached, Caleb called her to see the finished room. He'd installed the last window pane and hung the door while she wrote. The space smelled of fresh pine and possibilities. It's perfect, Sarah breathed, turning in a slow circle. Our room, our private space. Thought we might need it, once the little one arrives. He gestured to a corner. Cradle will go there, where the morning light hits. You've thought of everything. Try to, part of being a husband. He pulled her close. Part of loving you. They christened the room that night. Moonlight streaming through their new window. The stars bearing witness to promises renewed with every touch. Sarah traced the scars on Caleb's chest. The old ones from his cavalry days. The newer ones from defending their life together, and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. No regrets, she asked, their old question. Only one, he said, surprising her. That I didn't find you sooner. All those wasted years alone. Not wasted. They made you who you are. Made us who we are. She kissed him softly. We found each other when we needed to. That's what matters. The summer passed in a golden haze. Sarah's belly grew round. The garden produced abundantly. And her stories found eager readers. Letters arrived from women across the territory, thanking her for showing that frontier life could hold more than hardship. One particularly hot afternoon. Sarah was resting in the shade when she felt the first real kick. Caleb, she called. Come quick. He dropped his hammer and ran, fear clear on his face. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. Here. She placed his hand on her belly, and they waited. Then, a flutter, a push against his palm. Was that your child saying hello? Caleb knelt, both hands on her stomach now, wonder replacing fear. Strong little thing. Takes after the father. Let's hope it gets your sense. My stubbornness and your brains might be too much for the world to handle. They sat together, feeling their future kick against their joined hands. And Sarah thought about the story they were still writing. Not the one for newspapers, but the real one. Built day by day. Choice by choice. Season by season. Fall arrived with its harvest bounty. They preserved vegetables, smoked venison, gathered nuts and berries, preparing for winter and the baby's arrival. The cabin, once sparse and bachelor rough, now bloomed with touches of home. Curtains at the windows, braided rugs on the floors, shelves holding books and preserves and the small treasures of shared life. Sarah's labor started during the first snow of winter, 2 weeks before expected. Caleb rode hard for Martha Brewster while Sarah breathed through the early pains, drawing on the same strength that had carried her through blizzards and trials. Martha arrived with the dawn, calm and competent, turning their bedroom into a birthing room with practiced efficiency. Caleb paced outside like a caged bear, jumping at every sound. "Men," Martha muttered. "Useless at times like this. Caleb Thorne, get in here, your wife needs you." He entered hesitantly, face pale beneath his tan. Sarah reached for him, and he came immediately, letting her grip his hand through the contractions. "Tell me a story," she gasped between pains. "Distract me." "What kind of story?" "Any kind. Your voice helps." So he talked about their first meeting, about building the cabin, about dreams for their child. His voice steadied her as the pains intensified, anchored her when she felt adrift in sensation. Hours passed. The snow fell heavier. Then, as the afternoon light slanted through their window, a new cry joined the wind's song. "A daughter," Martha announced, cleaning the baby with gentle hands. "Perfect and loud. Good combination for a frontier girl." Caleb cut the cord with shaking hands. Then Martha placed the baby on Sarah's chest. The infant quieted immediately, blinking unfocused eyes at her parents. "She's beautiful," Caleb whispered, touching one tiny fist. "What should we call her?" Sarah studied their daughter's face, seeing Caleb's strong features softened by her own gentler lines. "Hope," she said finally. "Hope Elizabeth Thorne." Hope. He tested the name, smiling. After all we've been through, it fits. They spent the rest of the day in a bubble of quiet joy, learning their daughters' faces, the scrunch of hunger, the peace of milk-drunk sleep, the startled wonder of waking. Martha stayed until evening, making sure both mother and baby were well, then left them to their new configuration of family. That night, as Sarah nursed Hope by the fire, Caleb read aloud from her journal, their story, now published and bound. The words seemed different now, weighted with the miracle in Sarah's arms. "My strength is gone." The widow wept. He read, then looked up. "Remember that night? Every detail. I thought I was dying. Instead, you were being reborn. We both were." He set the journal aside and joined them in the rocking chair he'd built last month. Look what came from that storm. Hope made a small sound, fingers wrapping around Caleb's offered thumb. Sarah leaned into her husband's shoulder, feeling complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside was warmth and love and new life. Their cabin, built for one, expanded for two, now sheltering three, stood strong against the winter. Come spring, Sarah would plant again. Caleb would continue his marshal duties, and Hope would learn to crawl among the garden rows. But for now, in the firelight, with their daughter between them and their love surrounding all, they simply existed in the perfect present. The future stretched ahead like an unwritten page, full of promise and possibility. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, unclear whether she spoke to Caleb, to God, or to the mountains themselves. "For what?" Caleb asked. "For catching me when I fell. For showing me I wasn't broken, just building new strength." He kissed her temple. We caught each other. Hope yawned, tiny and perfect, and Sarah knew he was right. They'd saved each other, over and over, through blizzards and bullets, fever and fear. Now they had this. Love multiplied, life renewed. Hope made flesh in their daughter's small form. Their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Each day a new chapter in the life they'd fought to build. And Sarah couldn't wait to write every word of it, together. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Sarah and Caleb's story. If you're listening to this tale of love and survival in the Old West, I'd love to know where in the world you're experiencing this story. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Wild West Campfire channel for more authentic frontier tales. Share your thoughts about Sarah and Caleb's journey. What touched your heart? What surprised you? Your comments mean the world and inspire more stories from the untamed American frontier.